Hello my crochet friends, this is Sarah from Ned and Mimi, and in this video we are going to make a cozy colour block Ruana. Now if you have never heard of a Ruana before, then it is a super versatile garment, kind of like a cross between a shawl and a poncho, and it's really great for layering on chilly winter days. So this project is super easy. You just need to make 3 rectangles and seam them at the shoulders. That's all there is to it. So there are some color changes involved to get the lovely color block effect, but don't worry, it's nothing too complicated, and the stitch pattern itself is very easy. So even if you are a beginner or if you've never made a garment before, then I think this is a really good one to start with, because there is no shaping whatsoever. It is just rectangles. Now I have designed this Ruana to be quite oversized, so it is going to be very comfy and snuggly, but of course if you want to make it a little smaller, a little narrower or shorter, then that is absolutely no problem, and the stitch pattern is very easy to adjust. Now to make this garment you are going to need the written crochet pattern, because the number of stitches and rows that you have in each panel is going to differ depending on the size that you are making. So go ahead and grab that pattern from the link below the video and you'll be ready to get started. So before we get started, let's take a look at the materials that we are going to need. So you will need a worsted weight yarn in 4 different colours. So I used wool of the Andes worsted from WeCrochet, and that is a 100% superwash wool. Now the pattern does list some alternative options because I know wool is not suitable for everybody. So I've listed some wool yarns and some non-wool as well. Now, of course, the size that you are making is going to determine the amount of yarn that you will need for each colour, so do consult the pattern on that. Now, you will also need 2 different crochet hooks. So for the ribbing, I use a 6mm crochet hook because I find with this ribbing sometimes it can be difficult to keep the tension loose, so the larger hook will help with that. And then I switched to a 5.5mm hook for the body of the garment. Now you might find that you can just continue with the same hook for the entire thing and that your gauge will be fine and it will match that in the pattern, and if that is the case, that is absolutely fine. You don't need to change hook sizes. So then finally you're also going to need a yarn needle for weaving in those ends, and some stitch markers will be very helpful to mark the positions that you need to change colour. So you'll probably only need these for the first row or 2 of each panel, and after that you won't need them anymore, but I do find that they can be very helpful. So without further ado, let's get started. So to demonstrate the stitch pattern for this project, I'm going to make this little swatch, because within this little rectangle you have everything that you need to know to be able to make the garment. So we're going to begin working the ribbing along the bottom here, and then for the main body of the garment we are going to work first along the edge of the ribbing and then up like so. And each panel is constructed in exactly the same way, and the only difference is going to be the length of the ribbing and the number of rows and stitches that you need to do for each colour. So you will need to consult the pattern for the size that you are making just to find all of that out. So this is the right side of my little swatch, and then if I flip around to the back here, you can see that we have done the colour changes on the front and the back slightly differently. So on the back we have our floats here going up through the centre, and they're actually quite inconspicuous. So really for this project, the front and the back are pretty similar, but I think the front is a little bit more noticeably neat. So if you are following the same colour block scheme that I have, you are going to have 3 colours for some of the rows, but the colour changes are going to be done in exactly the same way no matter how many colours you're using. So I'm just going to show you how to do that once. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so let's get started with our ribbing. So we will begin with a slip knot, and then I am going to chain 10. Alrighty, so there is our starting chain. Now for our first row of ribbing, we are going to work a row of yarn over slip stitches. So if this is a new stitch to you, don't worry, you're going to get lots of practice, and I think it's definitely worth learning because it does give us a lovely knit look ribbing. So when I am working into my starting chain, I actually like to flip it over and work into these back bumps here because I just think it gives a nice, neat edge. So we're going to skip the first chain from the hook and then begin working into the back bump here of this second chain. So we'll yarn over, insert our hook into that back bump, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now I have 3 loops on my hook, and to complete the slip stitch I need to draw this first loop here through the second 2. So the easiest way to do that is to tilt the hook away and then draw it through like that. So let's do one more. So we'll yarn over, insert our hook into that back bump, which is a little bit fiddly, yarn over and pull up a loop, rotate the hook away and just draw it through those 2 loops. And then we just need to repeat that same stitch all the way along the chain. Alrighty, so there is our first row done. So let's go straight onto row 2. So it's going to be another row of yarn over slip stitches. So we will chain 1 and turn. And now for the second row, we're going to work into the back loop. So this loop right here. So we'll yarn over, insert our hook into that back loop, yarn over and pull up a loop. Again, rotate the hook away and draw through those second 2 loops. And that's it. So we're just going to keep repeating that all the way along. And we are going to work the final stitch of the row a little bit differently. So I'll show you that once we get there. Alright, so there's just 1 stitch left to work into. We can see it here. And for this final stitch, I'm actually going to go through both loops because it just gives a neater edge, I find, to the ribbing. So we'll yarn over, insert the hook through both loops, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then just complete the stitch as normal. And that is row 2 done. So the good news is that is everything you need to know to be able to work the ribbing. So I'm going to go ahead now and work some more rows, and I'm going to do a total of 23 actually for my swatch. So you can follow along with the pattern and work whatever number of ribbing rows you need to for the size that you are making. And when that's all done, I will see you back here to get started on the main body of the garment. Okay, so I have finished my ribbing for the swatch, so I'm really happy with that. It's nice and stretchy and looks pretty much exactly like knitting. So I have ended up with 23 rows here, and I have fastened off my ribbing. And just a little tip for counting these rows, because it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So if you have a look at your tail here from your starting chain, if you finish on the same side as that tail, you're going to have an odd number of rows. So I think that is a useful tip when you are counting them. And for this stitch pattern, no matter what size you are making, you are going to need an odd number of ribbing rows because that is going to correspond to the stitches that we will work along the edge here for the body. Now the yarn that I have used for my swatch here is actually quite a bit thicker than the one I used for my garment. So for this reason, for the next section, I am actually not going to go down a hook size. I am going to continue on with my 6mm hook. So we're going to join in a new colour. I'm done with this one for the moment. So to do that, I am just going to insert my hook into the top of that very last stitch that I worked there, grab my new yarn colour, yarn over and pull through, and then I will chain one. And now I am ready to start working along the edge of the ribbing here. So if you want, you can work over these tails, but usually when I'm making a garment, I actually prefer to just leave these and weave them in later, because then I know that they're not going to go anywhere. So now I'm going to start working directly in the stitch pattern. So I'm going to be working a half double crochet 2 together, followed by a chain 1, and then just continue repeating that all along the ribbing. So let's get straight into it. So this stitch is kind of a modified half double crochet 2 together, and that the first leg is going to be more like a single crochet. So I'm just going to insert my hook into the same point there where I joined, yarn over and pull up a loop. So I have 2 loops in my hook. Now I'm going to yarn over and insert it into the edge of the next row, so this knit look row here. So in I go there, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now I have 4 loops on my hook, and I'm just going to yarn over and pull through all 4 loops to complete the stitch. And then I will chain 1, because this half double crochet 2 together counts as 1 stitch, and then we need a chain to account for these 2 rows of ribbing here. And I'm just going to repeat that all the way along. However, I am going to stop about halfway so that I can change colours and join in my second colour, because that is what you are going to be doing in your project also. Now, I will say that working into the edge of these rows is a little bit more of an art than a science, so it does take a little bit of practice, but if you can just try and be as consistent as you can about where you insert your hook, it's going to look really nice and neat by the time you get to the other side. So let's go ahead now and make another half double crochet 2 together. So we'll insert our hook into the next edge, yarn over and pull up a loop, then we'll yarn over, insert it into the edge of the next row, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through all 4 loops and chain 1. So I'll just go ahead and work a few more of those stitches now, and then I will show you how to do the colour change to the second colour. Okay, so it is time for my colour change. So I have just paused here before I do the final yarn over of my half double crochet 2 together. And for all of the colour changes, this is the point where we are going to be doing the change. So I'm just going to grab my new colour, and then I will keep my working yarn here to the back and to the right, yarn over the new colour, pull through, and that's it. That's the colour change made. So we can just continue on now with the rest of the row in exactly the same pattern. So I'll chain 1 and then continue with the half double crochet 2 togethers. Okay, so I'm almost at the end of the row. So I have worked in pairs all the way along, and I just have 1 more stitch left to work for this very first ribbing row. And what I have found is that the easiest thing to do for this last stitch is to find the very first chain that you worked and just work into that. So we're going to do a single crochet into that chain, and that is going to give us a nice straight edge all the way along here. So that is row 1 done. So I just wanted to pop in here for a minute to show you where to put your colour changes if you are using the stitch markers on the ribbing to mark out the different colour blocks. So I have worked along here in this colour, and I have just 1 row left before my marked row. So what I'm going to do is just continue working in pattern until I've actually worked into the side of that marked stitch. So now I am ready for my colour change. So with the markers, you will just continue working until you have worked into the edge of the marked row. And now I can do my colour change. So now I can just continue along in pattern to the next marker and then do my next colour change in exactly the same way. Okay, so back to the tutorial. So we can go straight into row 2 now. So I am going to chain 1 and turn my work. And if you want at this point, you can just move around some yarn just so things don't get completely tangled on you. And let's begin row 2. So we're going to begin with a half double crochet 2 together, just as we did in the previous row. So we'll insert our hook into that first stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, insert it into that chain 1 space, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then just complete the stitch as normal. And then we'll chain 1. And I'm just going to continue on with this exact same colour until I reach the second one and I need to change back. So with this stitch, the first leg is always going into the top of the stitch and the second leg is always going into that chain 1 space. Okay, so we have reached the point of the colour change. So again, I am pausing here before I complete my half double crochet 2 together. And now, because this is the wrong side of our works, this is going to be the back. We're going to do the colour change a little bit differently here. So I'm going to bring my working yarn to the front of my work and also to the right. And then I'm going to float this first colour up and yarn over and pull through. And that is the colour change done. So now I can just simply continue on the rest of the row with this colour. So we'll chain 1 and then just continue in pattern all the way to the end. Okay, so I am almost at the end of the row, just one more stitch left to work. And this can be a little bit tricky to find where this next stitch needs to go, so here it is. So I'm going to finish off again with a single crochet. And that is row 2 done. So this is the back of our work, so we can just leave all of the tails hanging there. And then if we flip around to the front, we can see that we have a nice seamless colour change. So I'm going to do one more row just to show you the colour change again on the right side. So I'll begin with my current colour. So we'll just chain 1 and turn. And if you do need to move anything around, you can do so at this point. So it's a good idea with all of these colour changes to just take a few seconds after every row just to make sure things aren't too tangled up. So away we go. So we'll do our half double crochet, 2 together, chain 1, and so on. Okay, so here I am ready for the next colour change. So this time I'm going to keep my working yarn to the back and always to the right, and then grab the new colour, which is just hanging out here, yarn over and pull through, and that's the colour change made. If we just have a look at the back of our work, we'll just see that we have these little floats coming up here. So it's actually not that untidy at all, but it's just better to keep all of the floats on one side. So I'll just continue with chain 1 and then work in pattern all the way to the end of the row. Okay, so there is row 3 done, and I am really happy with how those colour changes are looking. So the good news is this is everything you need to know to be able to complete this project. So all you need to do is work your ribbing for as long as it needs to be for your size, and then work the correct number of stitches of each colour for this main pattern here, and then just keep going until all of the panels are finished. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up my garment now, and then I will see you back here very, very soon for the finishing steps. Okay, so here we are. I have finished my 3 panels and I have just laid them out flat here so that you can see how we need to set them up before we start seaming. I have laid out the panels with the wrong sides touching. So if we have a look here, this is going to be the inside of the garment. So these are the wrong sides touching and I'm looking at the right side. So one other step that I have already done here is to block each of the panels one at a time, and that just helps to iron out any little kinks that there might be in the fabric, because these panels are quite large and you might have found that your tension changed a little as you were crocheting and things like that. So the blocking is just going to help create a uniform size for each of the panels, and it's also going to help with the ribbing, just in case you found that your ribbing was a little bit tighter or narrower than the main body stitch pattern. The blocking is just going to help bring all of those edges into alignment. So the blocking method is going to depend on the fibre of your yarn. So I do have a handy table with a list of different blocking methods depending on the yarn fibre that you're using. So you can have a quick look at that to see what blocking method you might like to use. I used a 100% wool yarn, so I wet blocked each of my panels, and that just involved submerging each panel in water, leaving it to soak for a few minutes so it got nice and wet, and then squeezing out the excess water by wrapping it in a towel before pinning to a blocking mat. So as with the blocking, you might choose one of a number of seaming methods. And I do have a longer video that goes into more detail on various seaming methods you might like to use. And I will also show you the one that I chose for this garment. So if we have a look at my panels here, we can see that I've already seamed this top edge, and I decided to use a mattress stitch seam because it gives an almost invisible seam. Like, it's actually really tricky to see there where I have sewed the panels together. And this seam is also very, very strong, making it great for shoulders because these panels are quite long, so there is going to be a nice bit of weight in them. So you want a nice strong seam at the shoulders to hold everything together. And if I just flip it around to the inside, you can see that there's a nice thick seam here, but completely invisible on the outside. And it might be a little bit tricky to see, but I actually went back over the inside of the seam with a row of whip stitches. And that is really just going to add another layer of reinforcement to the seam and give it some more structure. So that is not going anywhere. So moving over to the other side, I have just pinned the top edges together, so I'm looking at the right side of both, and I'm going to go ahead now and start the mattress stitch seam here. So I've also left a nice long tail when I finished off this panel, so I can use that to seam, but if you haven't left that, don't worry, just grab an extra length of yarn and you can use that, no problem. And the great thing about the mattress stitch seam is that whatever colour you use is going to be next to invisible, so you're not even really going to see the seam at all, so you can use whichever colour you like. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so let's get started on our seam. Now, I was actually going to start from this outer edge and work my way in, but I think this yarn is actually too dark and it would be very difficult to see what I was doing. So instead I have switched to starting from this point here, and I have just got a new strand of yarn. So let's go ahead and start this now. Okay, so away we go. So I have just laid my panels out flat here just to make it a little easier to see what I'm doing, and we're just going to get started. So I really love these sewing clips because, especially with a seam like this where it's quite long and the fabric is very, very heavy, this is just going to keep everything lined up really nicely. So I'm just going to find the very edge stitch here and just insert my needle from the inside out, and we'll just leave a nice long tail there for later. And then I'm just going to find the corresponding stitch on the other side, and we're just going to secure with a whip stitch. So just in through there, back in through that very first stitch that we started with, and we'll just do one little whip stitch. And now we're ready to get started on our mattress stitch. So I'm going to go over to the side furthest away from me, and I'll insert my needle back into that same spot that I first did the whip stitch, and then just go around the post of that stitch. So I'm kind of going in and out between the tops of these two stitches, and we'll just pull through gently there. Then coming to the side closest to me, we're going to do the exact same thing. So inserting the needle back through that very first spot and around the post of that stitch. So it's a little bit tricky to see this one. That's the second stitch and that's the first stitch. And we'll just gently pull there. Back over again, in and out between the posts of the next two stitches. So if we just have a little look there, that's the second and third stitch, and then back over here and doing the same thing again. So let's just do a couple of more of those. And as I said, I do have a more detailed video on seaming methods that you can check out if you like. So for this particular garment, I do recommend the mattress stitch because it's nice and sturdy and it's going to give us a really invisible finish too. Okay, so now comes the magic bit. We've done maybe 4 or so stitches there. So I'm just going to hold the two edges together, pull gently on the yarn, and that is going to bring those edges together really nicely, and you can hardly see the yarn there, which is really, really nice. So let's go on and do a few more. So we're always just going in and out between the posts of the stitches and just going back into the exit point from the previous stitch as you switch sides. And then just pause, give a little pull, and it brings the edges together. So I'm just going to continue on all the way along, and then once I get to the edge, we'll flip things over to look at the wrong side of our work and just do one final row of whip stitches for some extra reinforcement on the seam. Okay, so there is my seam done. So it's almost invisible, isn't it? It's really amazing. I'm really, really happy with how that has turned out. So I have just finished off this edge here with a little whip stitch, and I have picked up that tail that I left earlier that I was going to use for the seam, and we're just going to use that for the inside layer. So let's flip over here. So this is a bit tricky. The fabric is quite heavy, but there we go. And now all I'm going to do is just work some whip stitches back along that inside seam, and then it's going to be really, really strong. So the whip stitch is very, very easy, and you don't need to be too concerned with how neat this seam is because it's on the inside and it's not going to be visible at all. So we'll just go over and back all the way along, and that's it. Once we get to the end of the seam, we just need to weave in our last few ends and we'll be good to go. And there we have it. Your crochet Ruana is now ready to wear and to keep you nice and toasty all winter long. I really hope you have enjoyed this tutorial and making this easy garment with me. And if you do have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me. And of course, be sure to check out all of my other free crochet patterns and tutorials on my website, nedandmimi.com. Happy crocheting and take care.